Hello friends, I'm Tim Wildsmith, the author of Bible Translations for Everyone, and in this video we're going to explore an interesting topic in the world of Bible translations. Should God's pronouns be capitalized? There are a lot of really great translations of the Bible in English, and while they do have a lot of similarities between them, there are also some key differences, and one of those was highlighted in a recent question that I got from one of my viewers who said, "Hey Tim, why do some translations of the Bible capitalize pronouns for God and others do not?" Think about that for a second. If you were referring to God, and let's say you talked about Him, would you capitalize the word Him or would you not capitalize it? It's an interesting thing to discuss, and we're going to dive into that in this video. But there are a few translations that do that. So for third-person pronouns, he, him, and his. For second-person pronouns, you, your, and yours. Certain translations capitalize those. Translations like the New American Standard Bible, the NASB, and the New King James Version, the NKJV. Of all the translations that do this, those are the two most popular. There's also a translation called the LSB, the Legacy Standard Bible. It's kind of an iteration and update of the NASB, and they do it as well. But there's a lot of other translations that do not capitalize pronouns for God, and they are very famous as well. The ESV, the NIV, the NLT, the King James Version, the legendary King James Version does not capitalize pronouns for God. I find that fascinating. And actually, there's one translation of the Bible that used to capitalize pronouns for God, and then the translation committee made a decision to switch and to stop doing that. I'm going to tell you about that translation a little bit later in the video. So let's look at how this plays out in the actual Bible. So I've got John 3:16 here. In the NIV it says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life." In the first clause there you have the words he and his, not capitalized. Those are referring to God. And in the second clause you have the word him, referring to Jesus, also not capitalized. But if we look at that verse in the New King James Version, you see all three of those pronouns are capitalized. "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life." As you look at those on the screen, which one feels right to you? Do you like the way it looks in the NIV, or do you prefer the way it looks in the NKJV? That's one small example of the way that this is going to manifest itself in our Bible translations. The next thing we need to do is look at why certain translations choose to capitalize pronouns for God and why other translations do not. I often hear two main reasons for why people like God's pronouns to be capitalized. One of the translations I mentioned earlier, called the LSB, the Legacy Standard Bible, talks about these two reasons on their website. They have this little article, this page on their website that says, "Why does the LSB capitalize pronouns referring to deity?" And it says, capitalization aids in two main ways. First, it is a way to show honor to God who is greater than man. So that's reason number one, is honor, respect, showing that to God. This is often called reverential capitalization. It's basically saying we are going to capitalize God's pronouns as a way to honor and respect him. I think that's a really solid reason to do something like that. The second reason they give is it helps the reader track with the author, making clear exactly to whom the pronoun refers. So what they're talking about there is instances in the Bible where the text is talking about God and someone else, and it might be confusing if the pronoun is referring to God or the other person. Let's say you're reading about God and Moses having a conversation in the book of Exodus, and the word him is used in there, or they're talking about someone. It can be a little bit confusing. So if you capitalize the pronouns for God, it makes it clear when the text is talking about God. So those are the two main reasons you're going to hear for the use of capitalized pronouns: honor for God and clarity for the reader. So what are the reasons you would not want to capitalize God's pronouns? I also hear two main reasons for that. The first is simply that it wasn't like that in the original manuscripts of the Bible. The Hebrew Old Testament and the Greek New Testament do not give that reverential capitalization to God in their text. They do not signify that the pronouns are set apart from the other pronouns for other people. They don't do that in the text. And so people would say if we want to honor the original text, we shouldn't do that in English. What's actually interesting about this from a translation perspective is you may have seen the Bible translation spectrum. On one side is word for word, formal equivalents or literal translations. On the other side is thought for thought, functional equivalence translations. All of the translations that I've talked about in this video that do capitalize pronouns for God, the NASB, NKJV, and LSB, are all over here on the formal equivalence literal side of the translation spectrum. They try to stay as close to the original wording of the Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek as possible. Yet, when it comes to capitalizing God's pronouns, they're also a little bit less literal, less formal equivalents than some of the translations on this side of the translation spectrum that do not capitalize God's pronouns. I think that's really fascinating. Now, the second reason that people give for not wanting to capitalize God's pronouns is the same reason that people gave for capitalizing God's pronouns, which is clarity. My friend Mark Ward wrote a really great article a few years ago for Logos, where he talked about this very thing. And the example he used was Matthew 12:38. I'm going to read this to you in the New American Standard Bible. Then some of the scribes and Pharisees said to him, "Teacher, we want to see a sign from you." So you have the word him that is capitalized in the first part of that verse, but also the word you in the second part of that verse. And Mark makes a really good point. The Pharisees did not see Jesus as God. They did not think of him that way. But in this verse, as they're speaking, the word you is capitalized, signifying the reverence and awe that he is God. So it actually kind of conflicts with what they were thinking when they were saying that. And Mark and many other scholars have made this similar point that by capitalizing pronouns, translators are making a decision about the text that sometimes makes it a little bit cloudy, makes it a little bit less clear. So for the sake of clarity, don't capitalize any of those pronouns and let people study the text for themselves and figure that out. It's really, really fascinating. Again, the same excuse, clarity, for why you should do it, is a good excuse for why you shouldn't do it. Now's a good time to talk about that translation I mentioned earlier that used to capitalize pronouns for God and now does not. Do you know which one it is? It's the CSB, the Christian Standard Bible. I write about this in my book. When it first came out, it was called the HCSB, the Holman Christian Standard Bible, and they did capitalize pronouns for God. But a few years ago, they updated the translation and they rebranded it as the CSB. They took the H off the front. And one of the changes they made was that they stopped capitalizing pronouns for God. And the reasoning they gave for that was all about this conversation we're having about clarity, about forcing translators to make decisions when sometimes it's just not clear. The verse that they give as an example is Ruth chapter 2, verse 20. In this verse, Naomi is speaking to Ruth, and she says this, "May he be blessed by the Lord." The he she's talking about is Boaz, so it's not capitalized. "May he be blessed by the Lord, who has not forsaken his kindness to the living or the dead." Is that second pronoun his talking about God's kindness or Boaz's kindness? In the HCSB, the original translation, they left it lowercase, but then they put a footnote that said it could be capitalized because this could be referring to God. We're not sure, so we left it not capitalized. In the new updated version of the CSB, that his is not capitalized, and they don't even have a footnote because they aren't in the practice of capitalizing pronouns. See, the capitalization rule forced them to put a footnote for that verse, where when you don't capitalize it, you just let the reader make that decision for themselves, or study it, or consult commentaries and things like that, so they can make that decision. Actually, what's really interesting about this, as I was studying for this video, I hopped over to Ruth 2:20 in the NASB, and I noticed that in the NASB 95, his is not capitalized and there's no footnote. But then in the most recent update to the NASB 2020, they did capitalize the word his, which means somewhere between 1995 and 2020, the NASB translators made the decision, hey, we think that this verse is talking about God, and so we're going to capitalize it. So there you see, there's a bunch of different reasons good reasons for why you should capitalize God's pronouns, but there's also some good reasons for why you should not capitalize God's pronouns. And that leads us to the final segment of this video, where we have to talk about which one is the right way to do it. So here we are at the main question of the video. Should God's pronouns be capitalized? I would love to hear from you, so share your thoughts in the comments. My thoughts are this. I don't think this is an issue of right or wrong. I think it's okay to capitalize God's pronouns, and I think it's okay not to. We've seen the arguments in this video for and against. What you need to know is that if you prefer God's pronouns to be capitalized, you need to start looking for a translation like the NASB, the NKJV, or the LSB that does that. And if you don't want that in your Bible, you need to find a translation that does not. I don't think this is a matter of deep theological concern or orthodoxy. What it shows us is that in the vast amount of English translations of the Bible, we have different translation philosophies, different approaches to how we're going to do this. And it's interesting to see the differences and why we would go one way or the other. I had a lot of fun making this video. If you enjoy topics like this, you should definitely check out my book, Bible Translations for Everyone, where I explore lots of different Bible translations and the similarities and differences between them. And if you enjoy videos like this, please click the like button for me and consider subscribing to my channel. I've got tons of great Bible-related content right here on YouTube that I would love for you to check out. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.